Hello everybody, it's Mr. Joseph. I'll be reviewing this study guide with you. We're going to start with number 1, which is arc sine of 1/2. I want you to remember this means sine of what gives us 1/2, and we must know that sine is restricted to quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. So before you even start this, it might be helpful to have an idea of what the first quadrant looks like. So for instance, if I drew this, I got 30, 45, and 60, which is square root of 3/2 and 1/2, square root of 2/2, and 1/2, square root of 3/2. And to write these in radians, as pi/3, pi/4, and pi/6. So sine means your y values. So at what angle is my y value 1/2? Since sine is 1/2, well, this has to be pi/6. And that's going to be my first angle. Because remember, we're finding the angle that gives us 1/2. So I'm going to find number 2, which is probably going to be right here. So now this is arctan of negative square root of 3/3. So tan is also quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. Tangent of what gives me this? And I know that tangent of some angle is y/x. So I have to divide y by x to get negative square root of 3/3. So once again, I'm going to go back to my unit circle, and I don't know if you remember, but 30 degrees, or pi/6, it's square root of 3/2 and 1/2. So if you do 1/2 divided by square root of 3/2, it's 1/2 times 2 over square root of 3. You get 1 over square root of 3, and you get the square root of 3/3, which matches this really well. So we know that our answer has to have 30 degrees as a reference. So the only issue here is because our answer is negative, it can't be 30. So all we're going to do is we're going to make the answer negative. So instead of the answer being positive 30, it's going to be negative 30 degrees, or negative pi/6, because if you're in the fourth quadrant and you're at negative pi/6, it is square root of 3/2 and negative half. So a negative divided by positive is going to give you a negative. So our answer here is negative pi/6. And let's find that. That should be right here. And this is going to be question number 3. This time we're going to be looking at what angle gives us negative square root of 3/2. So the inverse of cosine is the one that's different, because our restrictions are quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So if I look at my unit circle, I'm just going to look at these two spots. And once again, I need to figure out when is my x value negative square root of 3/2. So I always think about it in terms of the first quadrant first. So I'm pretty sure at pi/3, no, sorry, it should be pi/6, square root of 3, comma 1/2. And this is in Q1. So I'm up in Q2. I know that whatever my answer is has to have 30 degrees as a reference angle, and it has to be 30 away from the x-axis. So I'm pretty sure the answer now has to be 5 pi/6, because 5 pi/6, we're going to have negative square root of 3/2, comma 1/2. So the answer to this is 5 pi/6. And that will be number 4. And now we're right here. So now this one is an interesting one. So this time we're looking at our inverse tan, arctan. So we know our x is our angle. Sorry, no. So let me go back with that. I apologize. So if it was tangent, let's say that it was y equals tangent of theta, then this is the angle and this is the ratio. But since this is y equals arc tan of x, this is my ratio and this is my angle. So if we look here, the x value has to be the ratio and the y value has to be the angle. So what we're doing now is we're asking ourselves, when our angle is pi over 4, what is the side ratio for tangents? So if we look at our unit circle, pi over 4 is square root of 2 over 2, comma square root of 2 over 2. So if we use our definition of tangent, that's y divided by x, do we see that that's just the square root of 2 over 2 divided by the square root of 2 over 2, which is just 1. So our next answer should be there at 1. That's going to be this one right here. This one is similar, except this time we're going to find the angle because they gave us the ratio and we want to find the angle. So a couple things here. We see that our angle is negative, and since it's negative and this is tangent, we know our answer is going to be in Q4. We also know that when we divide the two numbers, it needs to give us a square root of 3. So I don't know if you know, earlier we had a problem with 30 degrees or pi over 6. We said that this was, when we did this one, our answer that we got was square root of 3 over 3. So because I remembered that, I know this one cannot be right. The answer has to be 60. And once again, I can show you, but I'm just trying to get you to get to a point where I need to memorize one of them because I know the other one is going to be the opposite. So if we're looking at 60, this is the coordinate point, or pi over 3. And do you see that when you do 3 over 2 divided by 1/2, you get the square root of 3. So me knowing that when it's 30 degrees, it's square root of 3 over 3. When it's 60 degrees, it's just square root of 3. So here, I know my answer has to be 60, but since it's a negative, that means that it has to be negative 60. So my answer is going to be negative pi over 3, which is right over here. And this is going to be number 6. Oops. All right. So now we're going to do composition, which composition means we do what's inside first. So I'm doing cosine of 3 pi. If I start here, this is 0, this is pi, this is 2 pi, this will be 3 pi. So that's just me doing my round. So if I was here, then I end up here. And I know my coordinate point is -1, 0. So I know cosine has to be my x value, so x, y. And so cosine of 3 pi equals -1. So now what I have is arctan of -1, which once again just means at what angle do I get -1? So I know that in order to get the number 1, I have to divide the same two terms. And since it's negative, I'm going to guess that at negative pi over 4, it's square root of 2 over 2, comma, negative 2 over 2. So I know my answer has to be negative pi over 4. Because if it was pi over 4, my answer would be +1, but I want a negative. So where's negative pi over 4? That takes us here, and now we're on 7. So sine of 0, so this means where is my y value 0? So at 0 degrees, I hope you remember it's 1, 0, x and y, and sine means y. So if I do sine inverse sine of 0, actually just equals 0. So when my angle is 0, my ratio is 0. So now I'm going to do sine inverse of 0. And what this question is saying once again is, at what angle is my side ratio 0? Well, just 0. So that one worked out nicely. And 0 is right here. And now it's number 8. I'm going to erase this. Of course, it did not erase. All right. So now we're at 7 pi over 4. So if this is pi over 2, and this is 3 pi over 2, then this must be 5 pi over 2, and this must be 7 pi over 2. So if you're asking me how am I doing this, let's stick with our original. We got 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and then we get 2 pi over 2, which is 4 pi over 2. So pi over 2 is 90, so every time I'm just adding 90. And that's how we end up with 7 pi over 2. And our coordinate point here is 0, comma, -1. So if I'm asking you what is cosine of 7 pi over 2, well, our x value is just 0. So now the question is, when is my x value 0 for cosine? And I know I need to look at the first and second quadrant. And I don't know if you remember, but at pi over 2, it's 0, comma 1. And do we see that our x is 0? So our answer here is pi over 2. And that ends up being our final answer for this one. And we are getting close to the end. And pi over 2 is right here. So going back to what we were saying before, we said this was 7 pi over 2. This is 9 pi over 2. Funny enough, we end up in the same spot at 11 pi over 2. But this time we want our y value because we're asking for sine of 11 pi over 2. So now we're going to get arc sine of -1. So this is kind of where this conversation that we had in class. We learned at an identity that said that if our angle is within our domain, then the answer will end up being that same answer. Like if 11 pi over 2 was in the first or second quadrant, we would have said, first or fourth quadrant, we would have said the answer was 11 pi over 2. But remember, sine is restricted from -pi over 2 to pi over 2. So when we ask ourselves, at what angle do we get -1? Well, the answer is still going to be over here, but it's going to be -pi over 2. Because we want our answer to be within this restriction. And remember, this restriction is saying Q1 and Q2 from pi over 2 to -pi over 2. And that's why for this one, our answer ended up being -pi over 2, which takes us right here to number 10. So I'm going to start speeding up a little bit, and we're going to get to our weird ones. So here, when does cosine, or what angle do we get -1/2? Well, if you do the work, you know that cosine is your x value, and your x value is 1/2 for 60 degrees, because 60 degrees is 1/2, comma, square root of 3 over 2. And once again, the answer is negative, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a -pi over 3. And when sine, which is our y value, and -pi over 3, which is 1/2, comma, -3 over 2, our answer is going to end up being positive 1/2, because in the fourth quadrant, our sine values or our y values, oops, did I write x value? Sorry. Our answer is going to be -3 square root of 3 over 2, because sine is our y value, and our y value is negative there. And So that takes me, I think, so let's see. I said that I got a negative value, but when I look at my answer key, it looks like we got a positive value. So let's go back and let's reevaluate this one. Maybe I rushed this one. So let's just start over. And that's what I always do, is kind of just get a fresh start and rethink it. So when is cosine negative? So we know that I said it was 60 degrees. It's square root of 3 over 2 and 1/2. And we said that instead of 60, we said negative 60 degrees or negative pi over 3. So this would have been, okay. See? And this is what happens when I don't write the restrictions first. So remember how I said sine is Q1 and Q4. Tangent is Q1 and Q4. And every once in a while, I always forget that cosine is Q1 and Q2. So me saying 60 degrees was correct because at 60 degrees, it is 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. And our x value is 1/2 at 60. But I don't want 60. I want the reference angle, which is 120. Because do we see that 120 is 60 away? And that's going to give us negative 1/2 comma square root of 3 over 2. And 120 in radians is 2 pi over 3. So the answer should be sine of 2 pi over 3. And we know that sine is our y value, which is square root of 3 over 2. And that's how you get square root of 3 over 2. And this is why circuits are so great. Because once again, I made a little mistake. I knew I wasn't too off. And I was able to I was confident in what I knew. But it was just more like, where could I have made a mistake? And then that was just me making a mistake on the quadrants. And I was humbled real quick. So now that means that we're right here at 11. So 11, this is where I feel like as a class we're going to have some trouble. Because we know on the unit circle, there's no value when you do y divided by x gives you 2. There's no such thing. So that's why I told you to make a right triangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this. And what we're saying is tangent of some degree that we're looking for will give us 2 over 1. The only issue is there is no angle that we know in the unit circle that will give us 2 over 1 for tangent. So what you do is you put theta here. Theta is y over x, or opposite over adjacent. So we're going to make this 2, and we're going to make this 1. And then we're going to do Pythagorean theorem, and we're going to find our hypotenuse, and we're going to get the square root of 5. So this is a weird part, and right now I'm just focusing on arctan of 2. So what I'm going to say for this is I'm going to say cosine of theta. I am saying that the answer to arctan of 2 is just theta. There is some angle that I don't know that will give me 2. And that's why I'm writing theta here. And then once we find out whatever that angle theta is, cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse, or your x value divided by your hypotenuse. So that's why this answer becomes 1 over square root of 5, because this is adjacent and this is the hypotenuse. And then I still need to rationalize it. And that's how you get the square root of 5 over 5. Which is one of our answers down here. And this would be question 12. And let's say that that one did not make as much sense. Once again, we're going to do the same thing here. So now we have arc cosine of negative 2 over 3. Once again, negative 2 over 3 is not on our unit circle. So we're going to make a triangle. We're going to put theta. And what is the definition of cosine? Definition of cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And adjacent is -2. And the hypotenuse is always across 90 degrees. So once again, I could do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And I want you to notice here that we don't know one of the legs, but we do know the hypotenuse. And if we do this real quick, you're going to get the square root of 5. Another thing I want to clarify is, how did I know that 2 is negative? Well, I know the hypotenuse is always positive, so that meant that -2 has to be negative. So, same issue here. Cosine of what angle gives me -2/3? The answer to that is just theta, because we don't know what that is. So now we got sine of theta equals blank. Sine of theta is opposite over adjacent. So our answer ends up being the square root of 5/3, which was our last one right here. So, to summarize this, I can see how number 11 and number 12 can be confusing. But another thing that I want you to think about is, how is 11 and 12 different from every single problem that you did today? If you could figure that out, then you'll be in good hands. Also, number 10, you saw the way that I made a mistake. I didn't do that by purpose. I wish I didn't make the mistake, but you saw me do it. You saw the way that I corrected myself and went back and rethought this. Because I would write at the beginning of my test, I'll probably write this just to kind of memorize this, because that will really help you throughout the process. I hope that helped.